Welcome to the Explore Words, Discover Worlds podcast, presented by Bradford Literature Festival. In this episode, our special guest, Damien Bradfield, author of Algorithmic Reality, explores the state of the internet, the addicting efforts of social media, invasion of privacy, data misuse, and the current use of your data to power AI, and how we can take back control. Recorded live at the 2023 Bradford Literature Festival, Bradfield is joined by technology entrepreneur and creative leader Suhair Khan to discuss the impact of these issues on society and how we can navigate an increasingly interconnected world.
Thank you so much for joining us. We're really happy to be here, and I'm super happy to be here with Damien. So this is going to be a conversation with Damien about his work, his new book, and his journey so far. So I'm going to give you a background on Damien. I know you're here because you probably know about him and his work, but he is the co-founder and chief executive and sustainability officer of WeTransfer. For those of you who might not know WeTransfer, I'm guessing you do, it's probably the biggest sharing platform of content and data in the world. And it has an incredible focus on fostering the work, not just of businesses and academia and research, but also of creatives. So Damien also founded We Present, which is its digital arts platform, as well as Present Plus and an illustration platform called Kuva. He's an incredible philanthropist. I know about his work with the Sarabande Foundation, but also the Supporting Act Foundation, which I was just in conversation with somebody about today, which supports artists and creatives and gives back, I believe, 1% of its profits to their work. Damien is also an author. He has written, this is his second book, I believe, and this conversation is going to be about his new book, which I believe is going to be on sale at the festival. And it is actually completely new take on how to tell stories around tech and AI and the future. So without further ado, welcome, Damien, and thank you for having this conversation. So I really wanted to start a little bit with your journey, if you don't mind. You've had an incredible career, and you've sat at the head of an organization that has had a really strong, from my perspective, ethos in terms of what its values are in tech. You're not based in Silicon Valley. You focus on really building around a certain set of ethics and a different kind of core, but you've managed to be profitable, to grow, and to build markets and users around the world. So I'd love to know about your path and your journey up until this point.
So thanks very much for coming. I was actually a bit scared earlier on that no one was going to be here and it would just be us two having a chat to ourselves. So it's very grateful of you guys being here. Do any of you use WeTransfer? Are there any WeTransfer users? Okay, that's nice. So, the business is nearly 13 years old. We set up something that was very simple. It was just about file sharing. It was really to serve our own needs. We were basically coming from the media landscape, and we were sending a lot of files, and it was a tool that was really very selfishly created for ourselves. So why would you put blockers in place if you're going to build it and use it yourself? It was about trying to make it as easy as we could for ourselves, but also for our parents. And I think the greatest thing that we did in building it was we always gave away 30% of the advertising space we have on WeTransfer to support our user base, which were artists, illustrators, musicians. And that's still the case today. And that's honestly the reason that I think we've grown as much as we did. It was about sort of paying it forward. If there was a strategy in place, which we didn't have, it was just what we thought was important. That was the strategy that we used. And it's still very much I think the foundation really of the company is about trying to just look after that creative audience that I think is really difficult to find and to gain trust with. That's most important.
How did you end up starting a tech company?
So this is 2007, 8, 9. Tech was quite interesting at that point. I think there was quite a lot of goodwill behind the tech industry at that point. I don't think that's the case today. We have two of the biggest giants in the tech industry going head-to-head in a cage fight quite shortly. It's got a little bit ridiculous, but in 2009 it was still quite exciting. I think It was a period where the energy around creativity was about building apps. It was about discovering the web and trying to use it to see what was possible. And I don't know anybody that was, I mean, my background is advertising, but I don't know anyone that was coming from advertising that wasn't thinking about how digital was going to be the most interesting thing, the way that we could build and create things to help people. So we played with a lot of different applications. We built quite a few things that were worthless and useless, and they got thrown in the bin. And I mean, quite interestingly, WeTransfer was something that we didn't actually really believe in, to be honest. It was so functional, it was just so sort of essential that we were using that really as something to keep on the side where we built the really interesting things. All the really interesting things disappeared, became just too expensive to maintain, and WeTransfer just grew and grew and grew and grew. And maybe it's through that sort of nonchalant indifference that it became so successful.
I love that. I mean, I think it's really that idea of serendipity.
Yeah.
In this moment where we're talking about algorithms and structure, is something that I think is really important to come back to, is that you can stumble upon the idea that's meaningful, but it sounds like it also has to be built around a set of values. When did you decide to donate 30% of your profits or your revenue to your users?
Day one. No, the revenues came later. So the 30% thing, again, we're an advertising business. So WeTransfer is powered by advertising. We don't have any slides, but there's a beautiful image that normally rotates on WeTransfer, and it's either an ad for a luxury goods company or a car company, or it's a piece of artwork that we've curated through a relationship with some creator. Our money comes through advertising. We sell subscriptions to bigger users. But from the beginning, we had a format that didn't fit any of the media landscape, to be honest. Everyone was selling banners. The banner for us was just painful on the eye. It was the ugliest thing that you could have. And the whole purpose of banner advertising was really just to capture something quick. Super transactional. It's like Poundland on the internet. And we didn't really fancy Poundland on the internet. We wanted something that was just a lot more attractive. So we created a format that no one could actually buy. So we had to make all the ads ourselves. So every single ad we had to produce, everything that we wanted to go onto this full screen format we had to make. And loads of people that we knew were struggling artists, creatives that desperately wanted an audience. I mean, still that's the most important thing today if you're a creative is to have some sort of audience, and we could give them that. So that's what we did. And in the beginning, it was 50% of all of our ads. And back then in 2009, I don't know if any of you know things like click-through rates, but we were getting 7% click-through rates on an ad, which today, if you're lucky, you get 1%. So it was phenomenal.
Yeah, that's nuts. So there is something about establishing credibility as a brand to bring users back to you, and I think it is really circular. I hosted a conference last year on technology and creativity, and when we were looking for partners and sponsors, there was a lot of, I work with a lot of young people, and there was a lot of anxiety about partnering or being named next to, obviously, a Meta or an Amazon or even a Google. But WeTransfer felt like it really resonated, from a whole new generation of creators, technologists, engineers who are as anxious about how you set the framework and the ground realities for what comes next in tech, as much as success and financial reward. And it's amazing. I know you didn't do this for the sake of like being really relevant and cool in this moment, but that sort of slow investment over time and what matters to you, I think is just going to be a lot more of a push for how products are used, but also how organizations are seen, especially by a younger generation. And I think that will filter through to others. One example, I think, of how Damien sees the world and his practice is that in launching his book, he had the opportunity to speak at multiple festivals, and he chose Bradford. He felt that it was really meaningful to be here. And I think that's amazing, and I think it's worth sharing. This idea of like, how do you go to audiences where you might not have many speakers coming from big tech, very successful entrepreneurs, founders, and opening up new narratives and conversations, but also probably smart because you see where the future is heading, and I think that's really cool. Okay, so we get to the book. Has any of you seen the book yet? Has anyone picked it up or? Okay, cool, I see. Do you have it? Okay, yeah. Okay, nice.
I gave it to him.
Oh, he's like hiding now. Okay, nice. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about this book. It's your second book, so I'd love to know how you moved from the format of your first book to a new book, which is a comic book, part manifesto, part comic, quite funny, quite serious, and engaging with this moment of time where people are exhausted of hearing about technology and both the ups and the downs of it, but you're able to create something that feels very seminal. So I'd love for you to talk about it.
So I wrote a book in 2015-16 called The Trust Manifesto, and it was really a book about the lack of trust on the internet and the fact that the space that we spend the majority of our time is actually a space where there is no trust, where we have very little connection with the people that have built these products, but yet we've handed over so much of our personal lives to these companies that we don't actually particularly like, that I really just wanted people to reflect and think, okay, would I do this in the real world? This relationship that I have with this company, would I do this if this was on the high street? And it was a project that lasted 3 years. I interviewed some fantastic people, and basically the conclusion that everyone I was talking to was no one trusted big tech. The idea of handing over so much data and so much personal information to these companies seemed absolutely ridiculous. The idea that you were forced to sign terms and conditions before you did anything seemed ridiculous, but yet everybody does it. And the lack of power that everybody felt was quite horrifying, yet everybody felt that it was somebody else's problem to fix. This isn't my problem, I can do nothing about it, this is the problem of big tech. I can't do anything, I'm just little me in Bradford, it's the problem of government. Yet, what I was challenging people with is, well, what if you just left Facebook for a day? What if you just decided that you weren't going to shop on Amazon for a day, and collectively, rather than taking to the streets and marching, we actually just used one finger and decided to use that finger and turn a laptop or a phone off? That would impact the decision-making around this so much that people would actually listen. So the power is actually with us. Net, people don't really care. We're driven by convenience. It's the biggest drug of our time. And as I was talking to, in this instance, my mum, who told me, it's brilliant you've written a book. Everyone writes a book nowadays, don't they? I thought, okay, I should probably try and do it in a different format. And I always loved graphic novels. So I worked with this guy called David Sanchez, and we turned some of the stories in the book into a comic book or a graphic novel. And much like being in Bradford rather than being on a tech conference, we also launched it in Spain, first of all, and then France, and then finally in the UK. I don't know if that was a good idea or not, but it is about trying to show up in different places, I think, and have a different conversation and trying to find a conversation that people are willing to engage with. And I think the graphic form is just, you can shortcut so many of the longer-winded narratives so much more easily in graphic novels that the opening chapter or the opening sort of story in the book is one that seemed to resonate with a lot of people. And it's basically the story of a kid, looks quite like me, and he's just walking through a high street, and the high street is a typical UK high street, and he walks into a sneaker store, he picks up a pair of sneakers, looks at the price tag, he's not too sure about them. A shop assistant comes up to him and says, "Oh, can I help you, sir?" And he says, "Oh, I'm not really too sure," and puts it back. Then he leaves the store, and he goes into another shop, and the shop assistant from the first shop follows him around and comes into the next shop and asks him again, "Are you sure you don't want those sneakers?" And he says, "Yeah, it's a bit weird that you'd follow me here, but no, I'm good." And continues on, and then eventually he's in a grocery store, and the guy's behind him again. Then he sees him spying on him, and everywhere he goes, basically on his journey home, this annoying shop assistant is still trying to sell this initial pair of sneakers. And when I explain that story to my mum and then say, "Do you not feel that that's what's happening on the internet? And what would happen if that did happen to you in the real world?" My mum said, "You punch him. There's no way you would allow that to happen." But we've got to a place online where we spend the majority of our time that we think that that sort of behavior is totally okay. And it was through graphic form that I think I was able to get some of those stories across. So there's 2 or 3 stories like that that are all a little bit dystopian.
I think, when we talk about graphic versus text, when I think about the media landscape shifting or content shifting, you think about podcasts versus articles versus film and video. And it is really powerful to bring it back to something that is still quite tactile, but also visual. And I'm curious, and if this wasn't part of your decision, tell us, but how much were you worried about people not being able to pay attention also for the course of a book to create something like this?
100%. So I think the average statistic is in the UK, we read 1.8 books per year. And that, so I'm competing with Dan Brown. I'm competing with, everybody else that's so much more interesting to pick up and flick through on an evening. So how on earth are you going to get somebody to pick up a business book about privacy? I mean, we've got a lot better things to do than that. So I do think it's super important to try to find other formats. Black Mirror is an amazing example of a format that I think Charlie Booker has done an incredible job of being able to just punch through some of these hard topics and get people to go, oh my God, that's so true. If you haven't watched Black Mirror, Nosebleed is one of the amazing stories that I think really just resonated with a lot of people because, again, it's 30 minutes, easy to consume, but very hard-hitting, and no one reads.
So
at a literary festival, sorry.
Yeah.
You guys all do, but we're talking about society.
But I saw on this, so this is a moment of, you're illustrating where things are at in quite a fundamental way for all of us. The good thing about some of this stuff, it's not all bad. Like we found out about the Lit Fest, we're tracking what's happening. There's ways of engaging and getting inspired across social media and technology platforms. I actually as I was reading your book, I was just like, I want to take this to senior executives at tech companies because I think there is. Right, okay. Yeah. But I think it's so worth it, this conversation around, I think there's a reduction to newspaper articles, regulation, reports and statistics on mental health, and then there's the human stories. And we were talking about this earlier, that what do each of us engage with? Why are we here? Why are people filling up that lecture theater next to us on, this resonance of, spirituality and modern society is humanity, empathy, and a sense of connection. And I do wonder now how much, because technology is basically framed within capitalist systems, that sort of storytelling and coming back to fundamental stories of your day or your life is more important than ever. But my question for you is actually about people feeling disempowered. So we read your book and we think about putting our phone away for a few hours, or next time you get a Nike advert, sneakers, whatever, you're just wondering, do you want them or not? You might buy them anyway. But how do we, there is a moment of anxiety right now with technology. It's not just about shopping, showing up. There is trust, I think, is, forget trust or lack of trust. I think people are worried and feel quite helpless. So because so much is shifting, I'm curious about how you're looking at the future of this moment in terms of technology platforms, trust. You're making the point that we don't have trust, or we should not have as much trust perhaps as we do in ourselves or these companies or these platforms. How do we recalibrate and figure out ways of either educating ourselves, staying better informed, or managing our mental health in a way where every day's news and every new product or outcome, in whether it's artificial intelligence or social media, doesn't impact our well-being, but also serves us for the future where we can actually engage in positive ways?
There are 3 elements to it, I think. I love a cheeseburger. Understanding that you can have a cheeseburger, but you can't have one every day is just simple, but not necessarily always the thought process that everybody goes to. Moderation, I think, is really important. It's totally fine that you buy something on Amazon. There are so many businesses that have done incredibly well because of the infrastructure that Amazon have provided. I think that's great. But to put everything in the hands of Amazon, I think is complex, dangerous, and that applies to basically all of these big tech companies that have been so much smarter than government in understanding how they can create structures that mean that they aren't criticized for being monopolies or duopolies. They're allowed to get away with an incredible monopoly over a big proportion of our lives. So understanding moderation, I think, is really important. It's okay to do some of it. Don't put your entire lives in it. Don't put your entire business on Amazon. Make sure that you're diversifying. I think that's really important. The second one is not forgetting that we play an incredible role. I think, as I said earlier on, we do have power. I mean, the power is really literally in your fingers. And it's a question of how willing we are basically to group and think about our role in this process. And then thirdly, of course, which is improved today, but it's been slow, is government. I mean, the legislation does need to be improved. There needs to be better executives working in government that are not retroactively looking at what's already happened and how they're now going to fix it, but proactively thinking about how things might be, in 10 years from now. And sadly, that's not really the case. And those three things combined, I think, if we get to a place where we have got a better team in working for us and we are thinking a little bit more about ourselves, I think the internet and AI can be very exciting. It's not all doom and gloom. I don't mean to sit here and pretend that it's going to be the end of the world. I think it can be really, really exciting, but we have got to be much more conscious about our decision making. And to date, we haven't been. Not to go on a complete tangent, but if you look at the world of AI, it's only two countries that dominate the entire AI business. It's the US and China. That's it. Europe, it's not in existence. DeepMind is the only UK business that's really involved in AI, but it's Google at the end of the day. So we've allowed this to happen, and I don't really see a plan for it to come into place and fix anything yet. But
I think it's really interesting that all of the new generative AI platforms, ChatGPT, etc., have come out of American companies, and it's something that we're not talking about. Whereas the UK, actually, this country has such incredible infrastructure and research institutions in computer science, from Cambridge to Imperial College, etc. So on a positive note, I wonder how many people here are students? Are there? Okay.
One.
Okay, got it. And any
Two.
people who are creatives in the creative sector? Yeah. Okay, got it. So, I mean, a lot of your work, and of course, you've created this comic book, is about bringing creativity together with, in this case, storytelling, technology. That's what WeTransfer has been built on. There is a moment, I think, of where we're at in AI, but in how we consider innovation in the future, in fostering more creativity and engaging more people from across creative disciplines to bring better critical thinking to how technologies are designed and built. How do you think about that? You've created these ecosystems. How do you see the future of WeTransfer, and why were you always so passionate about it? Because it's very rare in tech to have that real integration or merging of creativity, design, but also with hard engineering and science.
So WeTransfer file sharing is like the dullest business you could possibly be in. There's nothing remotely exciting about file sharing. It's about as exciting as being part of Royal Mail. The only comparison I make to the Royal Mail and WeTransfer is that we have what I think is quite a beautiful interface, and Royal Mail has a beautiful red letterbox. And those two things are quite charming. We focus very much on just doing one thing, and that's making sure that we get out the way. Our role is really just to enable. It's your stuff you're sending. It's your work. We're there literally just like the Royal Mail to take it from A to B. That's it. Our audience is the creative audience at heart. That's the audience that we really try to build it for, and that's the audience that we really speak to. And that's also from a marketing point of view so much more interesting than talking to a man in a pinstripe suit in his mid-50s. Talking to an artist or a musician is much more attractive and appeals to a lot of people. I mean, the thing that I think gets everyone out of bed in the morning is that we've had collaborations over the years with Prince, Bjork. We've done amazing work with Marina Abramovic. We're working currently with Russell Tovey. And these people love the product because they've used it to bring their projects to life. And I think that's one of the nicest things that you can do as any business, really, is just to enable something and be appreciative, really, of the service that you can give and the relationship that you have with the customer. And we've really tried to invest very heavily in that relationship aspect, which, from a tech perspective, just doesn't happen. It happens when you have two things. If you have tech and physicality, like in an Apple store, then you can have that relationship. But I think we're quite unique in being purely tech and having just a very good, trusting relationship with our customer.
Well, also to be inspiring, right? I mean, there is something very inspiring about saying that you've worked with Bjork, and I think that that's a missing element right now in how we consider innovation into the future.
Maybe.
I am curious about where you go next and what your work is. You obviously do many different things. I'm interested in how you're managing. I spoke to you earlier. How do you manage all of the things that you do, and what are you going to focus on next?
I mean, I still love what I do, so I don't really plan on retiring. If that's what, I don't know. I wouldn't know what else to do either. And I mean, I think a really important factor is that if we're talking to anybody that's getting into business or starting a business today on the web, that when we started, it was 2009. The internet was really exciting. It was so possible to do anything, and you didn't need to spend any money. So we could build a business with our own money, however little it was, and grow it, and it could be really successful because Facebook was free, and Twitter was free, and Google was free. So you could build this sort of audience without having to put a single penny down, really. It's impossible today. So you physically can't do it. You have to have hundreds of millions to build a business like ours. So what else would I do? I have no idea. I'm just going to keep doing what I do. We have a foundation called the Supporting Act, and 1% of our revenue goes to supporting emerging artists in Europe. They get unconditional grants of between $10,000 and $50,000. And if I see some of the work that's coming out from some of those young creators in a time, an economic time such as this, I think it's amazing.
But then, if it cannot be done anymore in these ways, and I realize it's...
No, I don't know how to do it.
Right.
I'm sure there are much smarter people than me.
Well,
I don't know.
So that's my question, selfishly for all of us in this room, is how we consider how to, whether it's you're building a not-for-profit or you're a creative or you're writing, how do we consider, I'm interested in technology, but there is a disconnect. Very few, when we talk about AI, there's very few companies on earth that have the technical infrastructures to build and train large language models, which are sort of overtaking, I guess, AI as a landscape. There's governments that seem that they're, in my opinion, almost disenfranchised in terms of, like you said, how do you make a decision in an ecosystem that's moving very rapidly? And then there's so many of us, we're all engaging with technology in so many different ways. Platforms like TikTok, I think, are quite amazing in many ways, because if you're totally illiterate, you can create amazing content and share and be funny and be a storyteller using technology. But then there's, of course, the downsides of addiction and negativity. But at least there's a platform where you can innovate and build. So I'm just, for me, there's a sense of, if we're further and further away from feeling that we can build and create and innovate in these spaces, does that mean that, everything that's, lined up for our future is going to be dependent on platforms created by very large organizations? And is that going to shift?
Yeah, I think it is already. So I think we're seeing massive deplatformization and the growth of these dark forests, which are the smaller communities that are popping up in different places where they feel that there's more trust or power or control.
What's an example?
So, there's a resurgence of Tumblr, which we all thought was dead a few years back, but that seems to be growing in popularity again because it's owned by a company called Automatic. It's a decent business that seem to have better values that resonate with the user base. Discord, obviously it's a huge platform, but I think everyone feels that it's a space that's much more controlled by the community as opposed to big tech. And then I think there are smaller apps and applications that are popping up, and Substack newsletter groups that are community without being owned by Amazon or Google. I'm not saying it's all over, so I sorry if I sounded like it's impossible to grow a business or do something creative today. I just think the web that I know is definitely at its day. There will, of course, be a new space. And the thing that I think I'm witnessing that's really interesting is there's been this desire to copy. When I was a kid, my granddad always used to say that we in the West, were the guys that were pioneers, and Asia basically just copied everything. Well, I think that the situation we're at today is everybody, no matter where you're from, is trying to mimic and copy everybody else. And there's this massive fear that if you don't do it, you're missing out. So if you were a writer and you did have a book, of course you've got to do book tours, you've got to do a podcast, you've got to make sure you're on YouTube, you have to make sure that you're writing as many blog posts as you can to make sure that you've got enough people constantly bombarded with your nonsense to buy something. If you don't do it, you're just going to miss out. The reality is that we all signed up to so many newsletters and podcasts and everything that we're bored to death of hearing from somebody else who's got something average to say. We're working with a few artists at the moment, and they're not using Spotify and they're not using YouTube. They're distributing their music themselves. They're not signing record deals. They're basically doing and creating the thing that I think is the most sexy in the world of storytelling, which is creating scarcity. I was talking to my best friend's kids this morning, and they were talking about Banksy. And Banksy is this amazing mythical character who's one of the best on the planet at creating scarcity, and mystery, and intrigue. And the amazing thing that Banksy has created is that despite the fact that we all know his name is Rob and he lives in Bristol, we still refer to him as Banksy, and we want that myth to remain. And if you think about it, Father Christmas, Banksy, the Tooth Fairy, there we go. We love the idea of this mystery and intrigue, yet our society today is so keen on breaking down the myths, and everything you read is how to make $1 million in less than 2 years by doing absolutely nothing. My top 10 tips on how to crack AI and everything else. Everybody's trying to break down these codes, when actually the thing that I think is the most interesting about storytelling or creativity or anything else is actually the mystery.
I think as you were talking, I was thinking about imagination, and of course, like AI is a very specific narrative, but what does it take to kind of foster spaces where you have that sense of feeling, which is driven by things that are not to be gamed or not logical. Okay, I'm going to ask one more question and then open up for the audience. It's around sustainability. So we talked about the rest of the world. So one of the other things that's happening with tech right now is that as demographics are shifting and everyone's like whether copying each other or doing whatever else, audiences are changing, content, where data is coming from is shifting. There's of course going to be a huge growth in population in Africa. I'm from Pakistan. You really consider how people are using technology platforms, whether they're just being sort of pushed onto them or they're engaging with them in their own unique ways and making the best of them. And you've seen that around the world. But there's also going to be this huge shift with climate and the environment as demographics shift, as countries change. And we're going through this process right now that's sort of underlying all of this like hecticness around AI and tech and what happens next. You have worked on sustainability in your work with WeTransfer. And I noticed, it's your Chief Sustainability Officer is a language for it, but I'm sure that's evolved quite a bit. So I'm interested in how you define sustainability in your work and how you see that shifting. And if most of your focus is on this from a file sharing perspective or more from the impact that you have as an organization and the messages that you can also push out.
So it's all of the above. We're a B Corporation, so the B Corporation is this label that you can achieve in, actually all over the world now. But Ben and Jerry's was some of the pioneers in helping bring B Corps to life. And it's a process that you go through as a company that you basically have to achieve a certain number of points based on diversity, inclusion, sustainability, recycling, energy consumption, everything. And if you achieve a certain amount of points, then you get a label. And it's a bit like an organic food label, I guess, for a business. And the most important elements of B Corp are that B Corp pushes you as a business to focus on people, planet, and profit. A bit of a misconception because a lot of people think with a B Corp that it's mainly for charities or for non-profits, but actually it's very much about making as much money as you can because the money that you actually are creating, you have to put back into some sort of purpose that you've created as a business. So when we got this certification in 2018 with the biggest tech B Corp, it just really cemented a lot of the things that we'd done quite organically and put structure back into the business. So going back to your question, in terms of creativity, we donate 30% of our ads to support the creative community. We work very closely with Amazon. So I'm always quite brutal about Amazon, but actually Amazon is our infrastructure. And actually through the brutality of the conversation we've had with Amazon, we've pushed them to be transparent about how they use and how they measure data consumption. Because everything you're sending through WeTransfer or...
Can you explain for the audience when you say infrastructure what you mean?
Yeah. So when you're sending anything through the internet, it of course goes to the cloud, which is not a cloud. It's just a computer in a warehouse somewhere in Dublin, Seattle, or Tokyo. But these warehouses are phenomenal. I mean, it's hectares and hectares of servers, and every server has basically got a motor and a fan, and it's generating heat. And of course, that uses a lot of energy and emits a lot of carbon. So our service is powered by AWS, Amazon. If you're using our service, you're ultimately using theirs too. The thing that we didn't have was insight into how much energy consumption our user base, through using their service, was actually creating. So over the course of 5 years, we got Amazon to a place where they would actually give us the data, so we can see and we can say, okay, we have 90 million users all over the world. They emit this much carbon. We need to make sure that we're either offsetting that or finding ways of making sure that we're getting to carbon neutrality, which we did last year. We got to climate neutral last year. And it's a combination really of offsets that you can buy and planting trees. And we choose to plant sea kelp, and we plant about 200,000 sea kelp trees every year. But increasingly, I mean, going back to your question about where we go in the future, what I would love to have as a business is that you trust us, and it's not about WeTransfer as any business, that you trust the business, you know what the business is doing, and you can somehow impact the way that you're buying or consuming through that company. So what I would love is that you could use WeTransfer. If you were storing 500 pictures of, the wedding that you just went to, but you've had them for 3 years and you don't look at them anymore, we'd encourage you to delete them, because by deleting those pictures, we could reduce the carbon footprint that we have. And I could show you how much that carbon reduction would be, and then find a charity that you like and reinvest that money into a project that you care about. And I think that sort of relationship is the way we would like to get to as a business.
You can build new worlds, you can create all kinds of incredible outcomes, and we actually live at a moment of great possibility. And that is something that I hope we can celebrate. I really think you should get the book. It's fun and it's funny, and it has the best of like who we are, and it's also creating new narratives. But thank you for coming and for speaking with us today, Damien. I'm sure this.
Thanks for you coming.
Thank you for listening, and thank you to everyone who attended our 2024 Bradford Literature Festival and helped to make it such a success. You'll be able to listen back to some of our selected events in the new series, coming soon.